Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be a little different. I know a few videos back, and I'll look for it and link it up here, I promised to show you a project that had been taking a bit of my time and keeping me from getting my videos out in that 3 to 5 days that I had normally been doing. So, to take one step back, two things in my life I have done since I was a kid, and I've never been able to shake now, even at the age of 50. And that's one, electronics. My grandfather owned a local TV repair shop. I kind of got my feet wet in there, electrocuting myself and getting in his way. But it's a hobby that stuck with me for a very long time. The other thing is flying, or the fascination of flight. Since I was about 5 or 6 years old, I started building stick and tissue models. Those eventually grew to RC models when I was about 9 years old. And when I was about 19, myself and two other friends decided to work on our pilot's license. And back then, I even started working on another airplane called a KR-2. So, in this video, I'm going to show you what my newest project is based on what I just talked about. And if you stick around, I'm going to show it to you. All right, so here's the second project that's been keeping me a little bit busy and not getting my videos out as soon as I wanted. As you can see, this has nothing to do with video games, but it has to do with a passion of mine I've had since I was a kid, and that's flying. I built model airplanes since I was probably about 5-year-old. And I got into RC when I was about 9 years old, and it's grown ever since. I originally started working on my pilot's license back in the very early 90s when I was about 19, 20 years old. Myself and two buddies, if you guys are watching, Marshall and Oren, thanks for keeping this one alive for me. But anyway, back then, I even started another plane project. It was a KR-2. It could have also flown with, a Corvair engine or a Volkswagen engine. A lot of people like the Subaru engines. But this particular plane I'm working on right now is a Sonex. This particular version is called a Waiex because of its Y configuration tail, and I'll show you that in just a minute. This particular aircraft is a 2-passenger plane. It holds about 18 gallons of fuel, 17 gallons of fuel. And as I already alluded to, and as you can see in the sticker on the engine, this is an engine straight out of a 1965 Corvair. It's modified for aircraft use, but it's a very simple, flat, 6-cylinder, air-cooled engine. The aircraft itself should be able to fly at altitude, should be able to fly around 170, 175 miles an hour with this particular engine and burn about 5.5 gallons an hour and give me an effective range of about 350 miles. So it should make for doing fun little hops. Now, I haven't kept up with my license and kept up with my flying, but I have just recently passed my medical again, and I'm very happy to get back into the sky and get my my ticket back in order. So, there are a couple things with this. Like I was mentioning before, this may split the channel into 2 separate channels, but for now, I'm going to keep them all together. I'm going to try to do 2 videos a week. One on the plane with the things that we're going to work on, and one with our standard video game repair. But with my current audience, I do want to do a call out to anybody who's a graphic artist who is good with line art. I'm not looking for full cell shaded 3D graphics or anything, but I think we need to do some basic line art type graphic that I can cut out with a vinyl cutter. As you can see, this plane was polished at one time. It's got a little hanger rash from the transporting it around and the years of construction. But since we are a video game based channel, and since we do have a Chevy engine, there's a couple things I'd like to see. Maybe some PGH GameFix based graphics. Like I said, simple, so we can cut it with a vinyl cutter, just 1 or 2 colors. And I'm kind of thinking, you know, a lot of aircraft would have something that they call nose art, you know, going back into the Army or the Air Force, World War I, World War II. I'd like to see something with Mario and maybe like a Chevy bow tie. If any of you guys out there are good and you want to send me a file, I'd love to see what you can come up with. And of course, it'll be on the plane for its maiden flight. Right now, I'm targeting to have this all together, maybe getting to the point where it needs an airworthy certificate by the end of summer. So in the next 4 or 5 months, I'm hoping this will be a completed project. As of right now, I have about 95% of the parts I need. The garage is full of parts. We have all the avionics, and the wings are built, and I'll show you those in just a minute. And you know, it's going to be a neat project, and I hope you guys agree. Even though this is a very big diversion from the focus of the original channel, but I'm going to grab the camera and I'm going to show you around some of this. And if you guys have any questions, remember you can always make those comments down below, and I'll be happy to answer anything you guys come up with. All right, like I said, this engine came off of a 1965 Corvair, but it has been modified. As you can see, these clamps are just loose at the moment, but as you can see, the original spot for the carburetor has been shaved off, and some intake pipes have been welded on with the coupler. And since these engines are going to run more or less at a fixed RPM, you know, while we're in cruise, we only need a very small carburetor, and it's mounted down here. This one happens to come right off of a Cessna 150. And if I can get a little closer, the bag's on it just to keep the junk out of it. Some of the modifications on this include relocating the starter and you know, adding a top plate. The original engine had a large bearing assembly in the cooling fan. Obviously, since we have a propeller going to be on the front, we don't need any kind of extra cooling, but just the baffling, so the air is forced down through the cylinders and out the back with our cowling. There's a large oil cooler, and I don't know what else much to say. Oh, of course, there is what we call the fifth bearing. So this assembly here actually adds another bearing to the front of the crankshaft to help support it. There were a few cases of broken crankshafts early on, not too many, but a lot of times it was chased down to a crank that had been overground and the radiuses were removed, or some of the import crankshafts just worn up to snuff. A lot of the components, as you can see here, came from a company called Fly Corvair, and William, he is a great guy. He answers a lot of questions for us on these engines. And you know, if you're thinking about building, I know people don't like auto conversions, but you know, the support for these engines is just absolutely great. The landing gear is just titanium solid rods and comes down to these little tires with Azusa 4.5-inch brakes. And yes, those are basically straight off of a mini bike. The cockpit's pretty simple. As you can see, it's two-place. There's control stick on both sides, and this will be the push-to-talk, you know, for our radio. You can see the rudder pedals down below there. I added this piece of wood just so I can get an idea where my instrument panel was going to be. The original instrument panel came straight off this corner and just filled in this triangle, or not triangle, not a parallelogram either. I can't think of the name of it. Anyway, and it filled in that space. But because of the types of instruments that I'm going to put in, I needed a little bit of extra room down below, and we'll show you that in a little bit. But, you know, if you look down inside, and I know it's probably dark down in there, there's a mixer assembly that takes care of the elevator and the rudders. Now here's why it's called a Waiex. Most people call these a V-tail, which, you know, it's not the conventional vertical and horizontal stabilizers. It's a V. But in this particular one, we also have this little rudder down here, which it's hard to show, but you know, it's all mixed together. And this is why this one's called a Waiex. From this side of the cockpit, you can see the two handles. One's hiding here, one's up here. And these are the flap handle and the brake lever. I'm not a real fan of the brake lever just because the throttle is also going to be up in this corner, and it may be hard to hold the brake and run the throttle for run up before flight. Several people have added toe brakes and heel brakes, which are a little bit more conventional, and some have actually put a motorcycle type grip brake on the stick, and I think I'm a fan of that. I'm not sure if I'm going to set this up using that handle yet and just using the brakes that are in the wheels already, or if I'm going to convert them over to hydraulic system and go with the handbrake. Honestly, right now it might have to do with parts availability. I know some of the kits I've looked at for converting the brakes over to hydraulic systems, a lot of the parts seem to be on back order, which is just an issue with the supply chains right now. All right, so here's our wings. The one wingtip is just kind of stuck into it, and you can see it there. The other one's still just kind of open. And of course, there's the other wingtip just laying around. And as you can see, the wings are more or less built and assembled. They could use a repolish, just like I said, same as the fuselage. It's gotten a little dingy from sitting around, but man, you can see the reflection in that without a problem. This particular one has the factory built spars, so there's no worry about if things were built correctly, or if there's going to be any problems. These bits of aluminum come together through the opening in the fuselage that I'll show you, and this is what actually supports the weight in flight of the entire aircraft. And of course, here's our propeller. This is what makes the what we like to call the money to noise converter produce thrust. This one's brand new. It's specifically built for a Corvair engine, and as I believe it's a 54 pitch by 54 pitch. Let's see if we can get a reading on it. Yes, it's a 54-inch by 54 pitch. So this is always the one that's recommended. If I had a little bit more horsepower, if mine was the 3-liter Corvair engine. By the way, my Corvair engine is a 2775 cc engine. If I had the 3-liter, which produces 110 horsepower, we'd go with a couple more degrees of pitch. And some of those guys have been pushing 180, 185 miles an hour up at altitude. On the side of the fuselage, you can see the spar tunnel. This is where those big aluminum parts from the wing will go through. This is where our flap connects. And you can see up in there where that bolt is, that's where our ailerons are going to connect to. And all these things down here, anybody who worked on sheet metal, these are Cleco clamps, and basically the floor of this plane isn't actually riveted in place yet. And that's done on purpose, just in case we need to access anything. It'll be one of the last bits that we'll put on. But basically, there's actually a tub of them up here. They're these little spring-loaded clamps with a pin, and it goes into holes in the sheet metal. And here's the pliers for them. hold on. So basically you just grab them and squeeze it down. You can put them in the hole and release them. So if you had two pieces of sheet metal together, it'll hold them in place. Kind of like this upper part of the firewall. I put a couple rivets in that I could actually reach, but I realized that the engine actually has to come back off so I can finish riveting the firewall. This part of the tunnel up here is actually where the fuel tank's going to go, and this glare shield's not bolted on, and you can see the fuel tank straps. So that's basically it in a nutshell, the fuselage. There is a storm coming, so I'm going to go ahead and push this back into the garage, and we'll go back inside and I'll show you what we've got as far as avionics and wrapping this all up. All right, as you can see here, this is the mock-up of my instrument panel that's going to be in the Sonex. We have some basic instrumentation. This one here is called a Flight 3, and it carries most of the information we're going to need. It's going to have airspeed, it's going to have our altimeter, it'll have our fuel gauge, and depending on the sensors I wind up with, could have fuel flow and a lot of other fuel related items. It also has a variometer to show a rate of climb. I guess variometer is really meant more for a glider, but our rate of climb indicator. So this is the bulk of what we need to know when we're flying. This one up here, yeah, this is our radio, and this is going to have two frequencies to let us talk to tower and ground and be able to switch back and forth. This is not a navcom, this is just a straight comm radio. This is going to be remote mount. It'll actually be under the seat, so just the control head is up here. The one down here is our engine monitor. This is going to give us a cylinder head temp, exhaust temps, oil pressure, oil temperature, and things like that. It can actually give us more, but we're not going to utilize this one completely. You know, it can do things like our battery voltage. This one can also do battery voltage. It can do current in and out of the alternator, and you know, a lot of other things, outside air temperature and whatnot. Now, we're going to use our primary flight gauge for our outside air temperature because it will actually give us corrected air speeds. As you can see here, this is our GPS. Pretty much all planes now are going to be flying on GPS. There's no reason to build an aircraft these days using the older VOR type technologies, or you know, using the Vortex system or Loran or any of that kind of stuff. You know, GPS can do a lot of good things for us. Another one of our instruments here is our transponder. This is required for most airspaces, and what this does is allows a radar system to know who we're at. So if we talk to a tower and they tell us to squawk a certain code, we can plug it in and it will get an output. This particular one is a Garmin 327, and these are great because they're a fairly high-end unit 8 or 9 years ago, but a lot of people are removing them now to upgrade their general aviation aircraft, which means the experimental guys can get them for a bargain. I only paid a couple $100s for this one, and it works absolutely perfect. There's a newer system out there that is known as ADS-B, which also gives us, well, it gives us a lot of things. It knows our location and our altitude, and of course the Mode C transponder also knows our altitude, which, mind you, the Garmin talks to this one with no problem for our altitude. But this one doesn't do that system, which is why people are pulling it to replace it with one that's a completely built-in one. I'm actually going to use a device by Avionics called an Echo UAT, which piggybacks with this, and it gives all the information I need to fly through any of the airspaces in the United States, theoretically. And the last instrument down here is our Autopilot. Yes, that thing is a flying beer can, but it's getting an Autopilot simply because I got it for a great price. Truly a fraction of what it's worth. Pennies on the dollar, kind of what it's worth. But the system seems to be working just fine. I've tested it. Matter of fact, I'll kind of post a picture here of me linking the GPS to the Autopilot, just trying to get them to talk to each other. And of course, the Autopilot can be a standalone system where it just holds my altitude and my track and basically just points the nose wherever the airplane's going. But in this case, the iFly 720 will talk to this, and if I log a flight plan into the GPS, it'll fly the plane anywhere I want it to go. Matter of fact, this particular one, this is a Sorcerer from TrueTrack. This will fly more precise than I'm legally allowed to fly. It will, as far as I know, it will fly the whole way down to, approaches for IFR. And for the guys who are into RC, this is what an Autopilot servo looks like. It's about 2 pounds. It's a big stepper motor. And that's basically because when you're flying the airplane, you got to be able to bypass it. And of course, if you had a standard large digital type servo that we use for model aircraft, there'd be a lot more gear train in this. This is basically just a single gear set and the stepper and a controller. And so this can be anywhere we want it to be as we're moving the flight stick around, and when we engage the Autopilot, it locks into place and assumes that's our new center. But there you go. We're also going to have a pitch wheel. I'm not exactly sure where it's going to wind up, but the rest of this area is going to be switches for things like lights and the starters and just, power in general. So it's not going to be barren. Also, this panel is a structural part of the aircraft, so I'm going to make the center section removable so I can get into it and be able to get to all the wiring later. So there it is. That's what our instruments are going to look like. So if you have any questions, you have any comments, go ahead and make them down below. I'd love to hear from any of you guys on the way you'd like to see these videos done, or if you think, hey, this has nothing to do with games and you should really spin it off on its own channel, which, depending how things go, I will. After the build, I figured the build process would be interesting to any of you guys, but the flying videos may be later on, probably next year, or early next year. That will definitely be its own channel. Just showing locations and the flight of the aircraft. But the first thing that we're going to be doing videos on are going to be the fuel system in that plane, a few of the physical riveting and mechanical finishing up of the fuselage. Maybe I'll set up the camera when I pull that engine back off and we finish the fuselage. But then I'm going to be working on the electrical of this panel. So I figured you guys would like to see that because it is electronics. I've got to build another lower panel and do all the wiring and get it all set up. But yeah, there you go. So comments and questions, go ahead and make them down below. I'd really appreciate a thumbs up just to know if you guys are liking this or not. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. A whole lot of new type of content is going to come out. And of course, I just got some parts in today, so our next video is going to be an IPS screen and a Game Boy Pocket. I'll probably do that tomorrow. And I think that's everything. Subscribe, hit the notification, the bell, and I'll catch you on the next video. Thanks.